are here today for the fourth session of Azure Fest seasons focusing on critical infrastructure, broadcasting live from Singapore on weekly basis until end of October. Before we proceed on these sessions, let me remind you a few housekeeping rules. Right. This session is recorded and will be available online in 2 to 3 weeks. Please ask your question using the Q&A panel on the side of your presentation. Right. We will also answer all those outstanding Q&A sessions at the end of the presentation. Today, it's my pleasure to host two of our very best experts in infrastructure as code, Akash and Mahesh, talking about the sensitive topic of security, how to bring the best practices of infrastructure as code for your overall governance, from automation of your deployment, tracking any change or visualization your entire estate. Right, that's a topic we'll bring today. So without further ado, Akash Kumar.
Yeah, thank you, Francois. First thing first, we will set certain expectations. So it's a vast topic because when we talk about security as a code, there are a lot of moving parts. So we have prepared this session not as a training or workshop, but sharing our experience from the field. Our views can be opinionated, yes, and every organization operates in its own way. So you can change this, and there is always an opportunity to fine-tune your approach. Agenda for today's session, we are going to set a context. What is Azure governance architecture in Azure, and what is the role of Azure policy in there? Azure policy deployment method, because this is the core of security as a code when we go for a governance, monitoring, guardrail. What are the good resources and accelerator available for us to use to expedite this journey? So we will be sharing certain best practices, and we have 3 demos lined up according to the scenarios we'll be talking through during the session. So let's start a kind of a discussion in a funny note. Why do we need to be proactive versus reactive? So if you see in this picture, why a use case scenario, your organization is operating, but if your organization mistakenly, if they don't have a strong guardrail policy and governance and structure in place, what will happen? Sometimes some mishappening may happen, and then you will be in a reactive mode. So having a guardrails and having a strong governance is basically a proactive measure for your organization. You save money, you save time, and you reduce your risk for your organization when they operate if they have a strong guardrail. And that's where the topic is all about. So if you go back to the old days of the world, wherein we basically the approach was like a developer or operation guy, people will basically be responsible for their own cloud environment. That was a traditional approach. So what happens is that you give a limited access to the limited developers and operation people, which basically reduces the time of innovations because they have to mitigate the risk by themselves. Not everybody was given a full access or a freedom to operate. So this was kind of a hampering approach. So now in a modern approach, which we call it a cloud native governance, the scenario has changed now. Now organization basically wants to give freedom to their developer. They want to give freedom to their operation. They want to bring SRE kind of a concept on the fly deployment, ASIC based deployment. They will have full flexibility to operate on the Azure platform. While the new team which has been formed called Azure Cloud Governance Team, they will basically enforce the governance, their management group, their guardrails using Azure policies, and the standardization using various tools. And that's where you basically not only mitigating the risk of any sort of a misconfiguration, but also you are expediting the speed of innovation and speed of delivery to the solution. Now, and that's where Azure governance as a holistic architecture comes into the play. As an Azure, we provide you control measures using RBACs, which is wherein you can grant a role-based access control to the individual or to the system identities or managed identity. Minimum access required. You can define policies. Policies are basically the resource management guardrails. And this is the session heavily focused on this part, particularly because this is where you create security as a code, but you will also have a flexibility to organize your resources in form of management group and tags. Why it is important? Because an organization is not an organization, but in a hierarchy, and hierarchy will be the department specific, and hierarchy will be the level of people working on it. Different people, different department has a different kind of access and different resource requirements. So how do you mimic that in Azure using management group? The resource graph at any point of time, what do you know? How do you get a visibility of entire landscape? In the old world, we used to call CIs. In Azure, resource graph is a single API feature through which you can query the entire landscape. You can get to know what is running, what configuration, everything documented and indexed. Obviously, if there are resources running, there are index. If the index or schema is changing, how do you notify on a real-time basis? And that's where notification comes into the picture. Last and most important, how do you operate and control the life cycle? And that's where the blueprint solutions like coming into the picture, where you create a stack as a blueprint, even though a specific department doesn't know particular stack to be deployed, your SRE created a stack around it, and anybody can basically pick up that stack and deploy it using any of the ARM CRUD operation, whether it's a CLI, using Portal, or using Terraform. So this is basically a governance structure which basically drives a consistent integrated approach to operate your resources on Azure. Under the hood, like how Azure governance architecture works. So if you look into that, any organization, like any SRE organization, security, they have various ways to operate on Azure. The first and foremost, obviously, Azure portal is there, where you can go to the UI, depending upon the access to the environment, the kind of access you have, you will obviously be able to do a CRUD operation. The same operation you can perform using CLI, PowerShell, or even using the cloud native tools like a Terraform. Everything eventually perform CRUD operation on Azure Resource Manager APIs, and they query the data from Azure Resource Graph. Now, what is important is an Azure policy, which is an engine which works on top of ARM. So whenever you are operating on the Azure Resource Manager, the policy comes in middle, and it basically validates your access to the environment, which is basically the management group hierarchy or subscription. It validates what all the policy definition, which is a kind of a guardrails we have created, and a role-based access we have given to the user who is operating it. And basis on that, the person can operate and on the particular target management group and subscription. And it can be as simple as like, if I am as a user, I have a privilege to create a virtual network, but I may not have a privilege to peer that virtual network with a hub, because that has been prevented by policy. This is one of the also sample we are going to show you in a demo. Similarly, the other scenario can be you can deploy anything on Azure, but on a specific location only. That's how you do a geofencing. How do you do those things? You create a Azure policy as a policy definition. You assign that policy definition, and then REST, ARM, and policy engine do the job. So the next slide, my colleague Mahesh will take about it as how policy definition actually works. What is this all about?
Thanks, Akash. So as Akash mentioned, in this slide, we will go through what is the Azure policy definition structure. Okay. So Azure policy is defined in a JSON format, and it is broken down into different parts. I have named many of these. So namely display name, description, mode, metadata, parameter, and the policy rule. These are the main important sections in a Azure policy. Let's start from the first one. As the name suggests, first property is the display name, that is to identify the policy. Next one is the description property, basically provides a context for when it's used, or basically it's a more details about the policy, okay, what it does and what it is it for. Third property is the mode. In the previous slide, Akash mentioned about Azure Resource Manager and the resource provider. So basically, this setting is for configured depending on if the policy is targeting an Azure Resource Manager property or a resource provider property. So in the resource manager mode, it can have basically two values, that is set to all and indexed. If it is set to all, it evaluates all the resources, groups, subscriptions, and the resource groups. And if it is set to index, it evaluates only those resources that support stacks and location. Okay, if in routes we cannot be tagged. So if we want to apply specific policy, not to routes, then we can proceed with the indexed option. Then the next option, as Akash mentioned in this previous slide, is about the resource provider. If you want to apply directly to the resource provider, then we can use the resource provider node. So currently what we are supporting directly is the Kubernetes.data and the keyboard.data. So Kubernetes.data is for managing their Kubernetes clusters, and keyboard.data for managing roles and certificating the Azure keyboard. So next section is metadata. This is an optional section, and customers can define any properties and values useful to their organization in metadata. However, some of the most common properties which we have looked around is the version, category, etc. Okay, and as I mentioned, this is an optional property. Next one is the parameter section. So the parameter and the policy rule are the most important sections. The parameter sections are for better management of policies. Okay, so basically with the parameter, right, you can reuse the policy definition for different scenarios by passing different values. Let's take this as an example. Okay, I have given the default value as West US. Okay, by changing this, let's say to Southeast Asia, I can reuse the same policy applied to a different location. Actually, my condition, only the parameter is being changed, but the policy, what it needs to be applied, everything is same. So it's the policy definition, we can use it in the same context, but we can pass through different parameters and make it available for the different conditions. Next is the policy rules. Okay, so consider this as a kind of a if-then condition in any kind of a programming language. Okay, that is, if it satisfies a condition, then do a specific effect. So in the if block, you can define one or more conditions that specify when the policy is enforced, and in the then block, you define the effect that happens when if the conditions are fulfilled. Okay, let's take this as an example. In this policy, the condition checks if location field does not have values in parameters, that is allowed locations, which we defined in the above parameter section. The effect is denied, that is, it generates just an event in the activity log and fails the request. Okay, so some of the basic things which I need to share regarding if condition is that it supports the logical operators like not, all of, any of. And we have around 20 plus supported conditions like equals, not equals, like, and I'm not going through each individual ones, but these are the many conditions which you can add as part of this if condition. Then followed by the fields that evaluates whether the values of properties in the resource request payload meet certain criteria can be formed using the field expression. And in the then condition, Azure supports the following. There are many kind of effects like append, audit, audit if not exist, deny. So in this example, we have put it as a deny. So basically what it does, when it satisfies the condition, it generates an event in the activity log and fails the request. Okay. So in the slide itself, we have added a link as well. So where all the details are available for this particular thing. Okay, so last slide, we talked more about what is definition, okay, how it is being created, what is the format for it and everything. In this slide, we will talk about what are the different ways policy can be applied, okay. So after choosing or creating the policy definitions, right, you want to apply, assign those definitions to effect a specific scope. A specific scope we mean is that the policy assignment is going to apply to. It can be a management group, it can be a resource group, or a subscription level. Something to note in the policy assignment is that it is inherited by default to all the child resources. So let's say if you're applying at the top level management group, right, it gets applied down to the subgroups and also to the subscription level, then to the resources. It's called the inherited. But again, you have the ability to exclude a subscope if it is required. Okay. So I'll just go through some of the common methods which we can. Obviously, in the GUI, the Azure policy is available where you can define the policy and you can assign to specific scope as well. Next method is the CLI. Okay, so here the AS policy assignment command can be used to create the assignment. So basically, you require the name of the policy, then the policy definition, that is name or ID of the policy set definition. Then we need to say give a value for flag for a system, whether it's going to be system assigned or a user assigned. Then we can specify the identity scope and the role as well. Similarly, we have PowerShell as well. So PowerShell also we can just create policy assignments. Then the next one is infrastructure as code. Okay, so let's take this as an example here, what we have mentioned over here. So here in the first paragraph, we are creating a policy definition, which we described in the last slide. So we are defining the policy rule. Then we are creating a resource group. Okay, then followed by Azure policy assignment value, and we are passing that particular value created in the above module to this policy assignment and assigning the policy. So it's a set of code. Only thing in the later slide, we are explaining more about the remediation through policy as well. So only thing to be noted in Terraform is that when you do policy remediation, you make sure that it does not. Terraform has the state property, right? It will store all the details to the state. So it should not get automatically remediated every time. So this should be taken care of when you create assign the policies using Terraform.
One thing I want to highlight here is, if you notice here, is a definition ID. So definition IDs are basically the standard policies available. And how do you know which definition ID? Let's say I want to deploy deny NSG on subnet without deny NSG should not be allowed. I believe there is a predefined standard policy available, but you don't know where is the definition ID. So there is a good portal, and I have covering it in the next slide. So either you go to that portal, search that with using a fixed full text search, it will give you the definition ID, or you can go to the GitHub, get the definition ID from there, use it, because this definition ID will be used in that scenario. And you can use the standard policies or the left side, right hand side in Terraform. We are showing a sample of the custom policies. Always recommendation is try to use as much as you can standard policies. Custom policy only if you don't have the scenario available for your requirement. So in the next slide, we are showing you, we have talked about policy. We have talked about how do you write policy, how does it work, if then that kind of a concept. It showed you how do you apply policy because there's policy to be applied using CLI, PowerShell, Terraform. There is also a way, because organization operating on a landing zones, right? There are Terraform landing zones, CAF landing zone, enterprise scale, everything is infrastructure as a code. How do you deploy the policy at that level? So in this scenario, if you see, I'm taking a sample of enterprise scale. And in enterprise scale, by default, we apply certain set of policies to the specific hierarchy, which basically means there are already predefined set of policies coming. And these policies are sitting inside your Terraform library path of the module. And I have a demo also covering it. What if you want to modify, you want to have exclude certain policy or add additive few more policy on top of the existing. So there is a concept called archetype definition comes into the play. So if you see in this scenario, I have two hierarchy created. I've defined archetype ID called online corp, internal corp. So these archetype get mapped. We need to create a JSON file like this. And in JSON file, we are defining which new policy, which in my case, denied NIC NSG is a policy which I'm creating it, need to be added. So that get added as an additive policies, and we need to create one more file called archetype extension _es landing zone .tmpl.json. So using that, not only you can have existing flow down policies by landing zone, but you can create a new custom policy, which is here policy definition deny NSG, and using that custom policy, you can bring that custom policy to your existing landing zone hierarchy, all that without even going to the portal, everything as an infrastructure as a code. And generally, as an organization, if you're operating at a scale, these are the method you should adopt, because CLI, everything is possible, but you will have a limitation in terms of going to buy bigger organization, bigger way of doing things. That's where infrastructure codes come handy, and there are patterns. The way I showed you, you map your archetype and you do archetype mapping to the policy assignment, and that's it. Whatever existing policy, a new policy will get edited. That is extension _es. And if you want to remove existing flow down policy to specific hierarchy, then you need to use exclude _es. And there is a good wiki where you can go and see as in how does it work. Now, policy scenarios.
So we talked about how a policy is structured, how we can do the policy deployment through policy assignment. So in this slide, we will go through how the policy assignments are inherited by all the child resources. Okay. So please note that though we are assigning at the top level, you have the ability to exclude a subscope if it is required at the policy itself. Okay, so that's possible. So let's say in this example, okay, we have 4 policy assignment at the root management group, and by default, this is inherited to all sub-management groups, subscription, and other resource groups. Let's take the policy metric alert. Policy metric alert rules should be configured on batch account. And if you notice that it is disabled at the top management group and at lower subscription level, it is disabled as well. So in effect, it is disabled. Okay, so let's take another policy from the screen, which is diagnostic logs in app services should be enabled. Okay, if you notice, it is enabled at the top management group level. Okay, and if you see the subscription level, it is not enabled. Okay, so even though it is not enabled at the subscription level, still the effective policy will have this as it is inherited from the top level. So something like in our old Active Directory, the group policies, right, where it gets inherited from the top management group to the down. Same way, the policy also get inherits from the top management group to the next level.
So one thing important is that exclusion is possible at lower hierarchy, but should be done by the root itself. A person or the owner at this level cannot exclude himself from an inherited policy. So this is the key message. So even if he disable it, and if there's a diagnostic should be enabled, and it's like a deploy if not exist kind of a policy, it will get deployed even if he's not enabling it. And if he's trying to exclude, it cannot be excluded. It can be only excluded by whoever has assigned at the top level.
Okay, so we talked about policy structure and how it is being assigned and how it is inherited. Now, one of the other feature within Azure policy is the remediation, okay, automated remediation. So, so we have the policy assigned, defined and assigned to particular resource or subscription and management. Now the policy evaluates and find resources out of compliance. Okay, so at this point, we can launch a remediation task to fix the issue. Okay, as a step by step, I'm just going through to enable a remediation through policy, right? First, we need to define the policy, okay, and the effect should be deploy if not exist or modify. Please note that point. We described above the lot of effects that can be used in the policy route, but for remediation, we need the deploy if not exist or the modify. Okay. Second, we configure the managed identity. So to do the remediation, we need the managed identities. It can be a system assigned or a user assigned identity. Third step, grant permission to these managed identity through the defined roles. Please make sure that as per the best practice, right, these roles are with the least privilege needed to do only the remediation action. Okay, last step is to create the remediation task itself. Some of the best examples I can say is deploying a monitoring agent, set up diagnostic settings for resources, etc. So
an important part is that the key message is deploy not exist, modify. These are the two action remediation strategies available, and they are going to be happen only if you have a managed entity or a system assigned managed entity created. Generally, most of the time, it is system assigned identities comes handy unless you have a fair approach deployed for a managed entity.
Okay, so in this slide we talk about state change events, okay, and how this can be used by the other applications. So end of the day, the policy is all about auditing, finding what is the compliant, and based on that, some action we can take it at another Azure through Azure policy itself or through other applications. So for this integration, right, with other applications, you don't have to use complex coding or inefficient polling services. Okay, instead you can use the policy state change events. Okay, so whenever there is a policy difference happen, actually it raises a policy change event, which can be sent to a Azure event grid. and this can be subscribed by other Azure functions, logic apps, or to use the custom HTTP listeners. Okay, I can let's say a sample case which we can think of is a software installation. Okay, so basically through Azure Policy, right, we can audit the settings inside a virtual machine using the guest configuration. Okay, so one of the built-in guest configuration policies can audit whether specific software is installed in a virtual machine or not. Okay, this could be a full or a specific agent is not available. Okay, so with this Azure policy change, which we can send to a event grid, then it can be called a Azure function. Then we can do an automation to install the specific software in that particular VM. So basically, it's Azure policy means following three types of event types. Basically, it is policy state created, state change, and state deleted.
And this comes handy specifically if you are operating in a highly regulated environment wherein you want to document every state change in your environment, and it needs to go to some sort of a database or some sort of a documentation platform, so you can have this set of architecture deployed. Even the changes happening, everything get documented. So coming to the good resources accelerator, policy is all about JSON, right? So, and I won't suggest start writing customly. There are good resource references available. Use those example and then modify or optimize those basis upon your requirement. Our built-in policies, whatever you see it on the portal for Azure policy, standard policy, you would see you can bookmark this URL. This is our policy GitHub where we keep on adding new policies. So this will become very handy. And the next resource is at advertiser.net. This is one of the open source project by one of our colleagues in Microsoft. Very, very helpful tool. And we have a demo because this has a lot of use case. If you want to search a policy ID and you don't want, how do you do that? You can simply go to this portal, put a full text search. Let's take an example, deny NSG. You will see the policies and then you can pick out one policy and then apply it. Using that one particular ID. Summarizing governance view via HTML view. This is interesting because when you have a large organization operating, you have a big management group hierarchy. Different hierarchy has different policy applied. How do you look into that? Azure policy gives you view. You can go to each hierarchy and go and see that policy applied and assignment. This particular open source tool gives you even much more intuitive and single pane of glass view. Not only policy, but also the change state, but also for the service principal and even the role-based access control applied to a particular hierarchy or a subscription. And we have one demo covered for this. If you want to operate policy at a pipeline, let's take an example. You have a landing zone operated by a SRE team, but your infrastructure security team is separate. They are operating in isolation, like they want to have a decoupled system. Then we have a project running. You can bookmark. And we call it enterprise policy as a code. What we have done it basically it is using our GitHub policies along with CICDs. You can basically push those policy as a pipeline, and during the pipeline you can have a validation and checking process, and you can target to a specific hierarchy. One more key point you need to keep in mind: policy states scan happen, validation happen every 24 hours of interval. So if in case you have a policy applied, every 24 hours, it will refresh the entire environment scanning. But let's say you have applied the policy and you want to instantly see the result. So there is a on-demand trigger scan available, and this can be scoped up to a management group level. So you can apply policy, scan it, and then you can see effect of it. ESLZ, which is enterprise scale policy. So if you are deploying enterprise scale landing zone, the enterprise scale landing zone, as I mentioned, comes with already a defined set of policies for a different hierarchy. But which are those policies? How do you look for those policies? You can go to this URL, you can bookmark, and we will share that. You can easily see which landing zone hierarchy coming with which all policies. So you don't need to be going here and there. You can simply review this. Last but not least, JSON viewer, because this we can write a policy in Visual Studio Code, but looking as a dependency and an action becomes a kind of a complicated sometimes. So this is an interesting tool, JSONcrack.com editor. You can simply write a policy in in a Visual Studio Code, or you can take it anything from Azure Policy, paste it, and it will create an intuitive way of like how the policy tree is being there, what is the action, how it's working in a much more easy way than just going through the code part. Before going to the demo, this is our last slide. What are the best practices? As I mentioned, use built-in policies whenever possible, because there are plenty of policies and most of the policies are available for all the scenario, most of the scenarios. If you really don't find a scenario suited for your organization, even in that case, you can use built-in policy and change it slightly and make it custom. That is one of the scenarios which I'm using in my demo. Scope should be company-wide at management group. Use exclusion as needed. So look out from minimize applying policy at each and every hierarchy. Rather, you go for a top root level policy assignment and then look for exclusion as much as you can. Otherwise, like it's practically doable, you can have it, but sometimes you will get overwhelmed by the task.
For the Terraform customers, as we mentioned, right, through Azure Policy, you can do the remediation, and the ARM template, you can pass it in the policy as well, within the policy itself. But when we do through Terraform, right, please make sure that it does not affect the state file, because Terraform always verifies the Terraform state file before, again, when it validates with the resources already provisioned. So it should not be going back into a looping stage, like every time it just Azure Policy validates it and Azure Terraform again put it back the same thing. So it should not be the case.
Use non-compliance message in your policy, because sometimes you will have a deny rule or audit rule. Deny rule particularly, user who is end user consuming the services, and if he's been denied, a well-described compliance message will help him. Otherwise, he will just say things are getting blocked without noticing that it's being blocked intentionally from a policy point of view. Another important part is start always with audit, because deny is always good. Like when you're comfortable with audit part, then you go for the next thing.
The next one is you can with Azure policies, right? The guest level or OS configurations you can validate, and as we explained in the previous slide, right? You can verify, let's say, a software is installed or not. Then you can remediate through the Azure policy itself to install back that particular software. So all these things you can achieve through the Azure policy.
In some policies, you will find preview, and some policies you will see prefix by deprecated. So previews are the marked policy which are still in preview but officially supported. Deprecated, there are newer, better policies. So you should eventually migrate to the preview version before they become GA. So this is one of the suggestions. The last point I want to mention is multiple choice conflicting. You will have sometimes you have same policy in a different ways applied. So the important part is most restrictive will win. So deny always win over audit. So that's the thumb rule. So with that, we are moving towards demos now. So the first demo, we will show you how do you apply custom policy via UI. We have pre-recorded demos, so let's have a look into that. In my first demo, I'm going to show you how can you apply a custom policy through Azure portal. The policy which I have it a simple policy where I'm driving a proper data classification strategy in the organization for any storage account creation. If the storage account doesn't have a specific tag, I'm going to disable Defender, and if the tag is not there and if the Defender policy is enabled at a subscription wide, it will keep on working it. So I have put this storage policy in a JSON crack, which is a tool, and you can see these are the different parameters I'm going to use, which is classification. I'm going to use classification tag. I'm going to use classification flag, and the rule is simple. If any storage resource provider operation contains these parameters, and if it is not contain this parameter and all of these things has to be evaluated together, then I'm going to append tags basis upon these parameters. So let's create this policy. So I will go start creating a definition in the portal. Let me copy that. Copied. I will go and create a tag policy to my resource storage classification drive. I'll use it existing. Let's say storage is going to be my type. It's not must fields, and I'll just replace existing policy with this. There you go. The policy is created. Next, I'm going to assign this policy. So I will assign to a demonstration resource group test. Go next. Next, I will also have my identity created for append operation because there is some work to be done. Review, create. So policy created, policy assigned. Next, let's create storage accounts. So I go there, I'm going to use the assign demonstrated resource group scope. So I'll use this today's, let's say demo 1010 no tag. This is going to be, let's say demo 10 no tag. I'll simply create, considering it's a storage account with no tag and my policy doesn't dictate anything, it should not do any operations on that. So let's create one more storage account with a different tag, not equals to red, because if it is red then it will not do anything. So let's do demo strg v2 tag blue. This is just a name, so don't get confused with this. I'll choose this local redundant to save my cost. Pick it up classification tag, and the classification tab was sensitive, and my flag is going to be blue. So go ahead and create it. While the storage account getting created with another one, we should see what happened with the first storage account. So let me filter it out with first. This was my first storage account. I didn't put any tag, so as expected, no operations by policy as expected. While the second storage account getting created, we'll see how does it come up. So second storage account has been created, and if you go inside, we provided classification sensitive, we provided classification flag. Classification flag was not red, and because it was not red, the Defender auto enable has been off. So now on this storage account, Defender will not be enabled. Anything else, it will get enabled, because we can have auto enable Defender policy enabled at a management group or a subscription level. So this is how a policy can drive auto remediation of tasks. In this case, we are appending tag. This is upon the storage classification, and it is addressing not only just security, but also kind of a hygiene in your environment, wherein people should actually follow the right classification for their storage accounts. In the next demo, I'm going to use a custom policy along with the standard policies which are applied as enterprise scale via Terraform Landing Zone. I'm going to use archetype, and I'm going to apply to a specific hierarchy and see how does it get applied and how does it work. In this demo, I will show you how am I going to use a custom policy inside my landing zone, which has been deployed by Terraform, and I'm using enterprise scale policies alongside enterprise scale landing zone, which is running on Terraform as an automation and performing the task. The scenario is like that. I have a landing zone deploy using virtual WAN. I'm doing a centralized routing through using virtual hub. I don't want my project team to apply UDR on their subnets. So how do I disable that? So let's see first. In this scenario, if you can see, I have a virtual network already created. I have a one routing created already, which we call it a UDR. So I'll go to subnet, and if in subnet, I'll try to take, let's take an example, default subnet, and I can see there's a route table available. I go and update. So what's happening is, even if as an SRE organization, you are enforcing certain routings through virtual hub, if project team operating at the virtual network, they will have a capability of overwriting those routes. So that's what we want to avoid it. So what I'll do, I showed you it is still, I'm able to attach it because I have not enforced the policy. So I'll just remove that, and I will run the policy now. So how do I run the policy? It's a separate session altogether, as in how enterprise scale landing zone gets deployed using Terraform. We have open source repo for that. But if you notice, there are certain preset of policies, we enforce it, and these policies can be seen inside the modules of
Terraform providers. So if you go inside there, you would be able to see those enterprise scale policies under the lib and under the archetype. So I won't go detail into that, but you will also have your own lib folder where you will basically map those archetype. Archetype is a way through which you will basically package your policies to the landing zone hierarchy, which in case this, I'm going to already have a bunch of policy pushed as part of enterprise scale policies. Now I'm going to add one more policy. So I have a code already added. So this is the policy definition, deny UDR. I'm using the same JSON tool, and you can see that it's giving me that, hey, the policy has two rules. One is in case of anything, any of those following, if it is detecting network, and if it is detecting subnets, and if it is detecting route tables, that is one of the scenarios. Secondly, similarly, there is one excluded subnet because there are scenarios like Azure Firewall need a connectivity. So we are excluding that. Now, effect is simply deny. And effect, if you can see, the deny is the default value already given. So using this policy, which I have already put it in my code, I'm going to run this. So how I'm going to do that? So I'll copy the definition name. You need to have a definition, and definition needs to be assigned. I already have a bunch of policy created. So I will basically add this additional policy on top of my existing policy as an additive policy. So what I'll do, I've added that, and I will basically do a Terraform plan and then Terraform apply. So my Terraform plan is ready. You can see the custom policy JSON code has been picked up, definition ID. It is also picking it up the assignment, the time to apply. So I'll quickly do that in background, and once the policy get applied, I come back. So after a while, because the enterprise scale policy goes through entire hierarchy, obviously it takes time, so it's applied. So let's go to the portal. First and foremost, we applied a custom policy. So let's see if we have policy. Yes, we have a policy, and it's a custom type. It is telling you subnet should not be allowed to have a user defined route. Definition there. Let's see if the assignment is there. So user defined. Yes, there is a policy denied associating of a subnet with the user defined scope at the entire route. Let's go back to the same resource group, same VNet, and go to the default route, test, save, boom. So this time we are not able to assign user defined to the subnet where we were able to do it, because this time we have created a policy and we are preventing it.
So this was the second demo where we have a landing zone created by Terraform. We didn't even go to the UI. Everything was done infrastructure as a code, and we are able to successfully prevent any sort of a pre-erring at the resource by the individual user operating at that level. We have done a UI demo. We have done a code demo. The last important part is, how do I see that? How the environment is running? This is where the governance reporting comes. The UI gives you that option, but Easy Governance, which is one of our an open source tool, gives you much more easier way of intuitive way to see the entire landscape view. So let's look into that demo.
In this demo, I will show you how EasyGov's tool, which is an open source Azure governance visualizer tool, can help you quickly have a single pane of a glass view of your Azure governance in your organization. It's an interesting tool because it not only shows you the right hierarchy of your organization in terms of a management group, the kind of the hierarchy you are following it, but what is more important is that at each hierarchy level, what kind of policies have you applied, how many subscriptions running, what kind of RBACs there, what are inheritance. You get all those things through the UI also, but sometimes you may find it kind of a little bit cumbersome because you have to click so many places. So you just go to this repo, fork it, and follow the instruction, whichever method you are comfortable. So I'm using a kind of a PowerShell way. So you can see it is still running in my environment. So when it runs, basically it's a code space where I'm using it. It will basically query the entire environment, and it will basically create some reports in a CSV form. Obviously, you can use those. And what most important is it will also create an intuitive HTML view, which can basically allows you to have a quick glance view. So if in case in my scenario, you can see it's already created a kind of a visualizer that this is the hierarchy structure in my organization. So this is my root, these are the decommissions hierarchy, this is the landing zone, this is the platform. Under the platform, I'm running connectivity identity, and these are the subscription, one quantity. So it clearly gives me information. I want to see the subscription, the policies running in my, so I have a total 107 custom policies running, right, at org level. There are some 30 orphan policies. There are some 7 custom per policy set definitions and other things which are running inside environment. Even the RBACs, what all the RBACs are there, you can have a quickly glance of view. So if I want to see which all custom roles, click on this and here you go. And similarly, if I go to blueprint, if I have it, it will show it up. If you want to see the management group, I have a total 11 management group hierarchy that is shown it up. Important is also like limits. If in case you are hitting any policy limits, you can clearly see those things and take a precautionary things, actions. Diagnostic plays a vital role, specifically if you're operating at a scale. If you have not configured diagnostic at a central location, it will clearly show it up as in which all things are configured, which are not configured, and you can take a preemptive action, and then you can have a centralized SRE concepts. Consumption is not showing it up, and it is also very interesting because you have policy, but you have changed some policies. What happened, what date? It is also keeping a record of that this is my policy created on this. I have made some modification on this and date time and updated by whom. So you have a control change tracking available for your reference. Now going too deep in terms of the hierarchy, if I go, let's take an example, in this case, customer online. So this is my customer online highlighted. And if I click on this and go down, so there you can see it start showing it up under this hierarchy. What is the name, what is the group path, what all the policies are there, and most important would be how many policies I'm inheriting from the top, how many policies are applied in this. So there are total role assignments, 15 policies, 15 are coming from inheritance, policy set 6 which are coming from inheritance. So it seems like I have not applied any custom policy at this hierarchy. So if I go into the internal corp, let's see the same way I can clearly see policies, and there you can see there are some custom policies. And how do I see those custom policies? I can simply click on it, and there you go. You can see RDB access should be blocked. It's a custom policy, it's been pushed, and it is running in my environment. So this is an interesting tool which I would strongly suggest if your organization is operating at a scale. Not only use UI, but probably deploy this as an internal application. It has a web app version also, and use it for your organization benefit. Regularly do audit, do a check who is doing what, because even if the policy getting changed, it will have impact in your environment. All those things, even if you see like even the Azure Active Directory side of the things, it even tells you how many principles you are running, secret expiring, very critical from the point of the governance, monitoring and management. So anything expiring coming near to 14 days, take an action, move towards managed identity as much as you can.
Yeah, so this was our last demo where we quickly show you the governance tool can help you to create a quick visualizer, and you can have a quick, like a single glass of pane of glass view of your organization.
Thanks, Akash. Thanks, Mahesh, for all this presentation and demo. Really hands-on and to deploy and how to see how to manage our policy and visualize the policies. There were a few questions from the audience, specifically on remediation and how we apply policies. So let me go through. I mean, it's been partially answered, but it has been answered. But let me go through on the remediation. How does it affect the existing resources? I think there is this question specifically when we deny the access.
So denying access is like, deny is a prevention, right? So if you are creating a resource and the resource has a deny policy, which means your resource will not be provisioned. That's the way it's going to work.
Okay, so if I have an existing asset and I start to implement the deny access, all my existing users won't get access from now on.
No, I think for existing user, yes, for existing users, if they want to deploy anything new, it should get denied for new resources. but I think it's existing user resources deployed would be audited.
So basically, it will not affect the existing resources. Only for the new resources, this policy will get applied. And as Akash mentioned, right, it's a kind of auditing also. So next time when this policy run, right, all the existing resources will be listed as non-compliant.
Yes.
The message will go as non-compliant, but that won't apply immediately.
Yeah, but for new resources, it will not allow.
There was also a question of where do I get the minimum policies or the recommended policy? And I will extend that question slightly. It says, is there a way for me as a user to know if there was any change in a recommendation, like if there is a new regulation in place, how I make sure that my environment is compliant with the new regulation for that?
So if you see, like we have regulation wise, like we have the policy set definition created. So policy set definition is the bulk of policy baked together. So if you go inside NIST and ISO, like we have already set definition created, you can use those. We have put a best effort to manage and to bring all the policy related to those compliance, and you can apply those. So basically, once you apply those standards to your environment, it basically applying all those set of, let's say, 100 policies together. But I also recommend you, whenever you're applying it, have a look. Maybe you may need to add something extra, or you may need to remove it, something which is already getting applied, because our approach is best effort of our understanding of a regulation. And regulation, keep on changing it on day-to-day basis, depending upon the scenarios across all the world.
Yeah, just to add up, as Akash mentioned, right, there is no something like a basic minimum this should be applied. So we have the list of Azure policies already, built-in policies are available. And again, for each environment, you can configure this as per apply these policies to this particular environment based on your needs. And also, you can, as we went through the demo, right, you can create custom policies for your specific needs based on these built-in policies as well. So it has to be a kind of a holistic approach whereby we go through the basic benchmark, like CA's benchmark, which is one of the most common, which is followed across by all the enterprises. Similarly, we can approach any of this benchmark plus our built-in policies to be customized for their environment.
Cloud adoption framework documentation, what we have for governance, would be very good resource. If you really want to know basic policies, at least need to be recommended. In fact, in our enterprise scale landing zone, as I described and demonstrated, we already push minimum set of policies. Maybe this can be a good starting point to have a guardrail for your organization.
Thank you so much. Maybe one question from my end. I mean, when we talk policies, governance, there is also audit, right? From your experience, I mean, what is the frequency we should get those audits, and how we can best support those audits from the architect perspective? Okay,
so as a best practice, right, when you create a policies, right, the first action actually is just audits. It has to be the development phase itself, right? You need to first audit the policy against our resources. Then only it has to be going to the next effect based like deny or assign policy. So the frequency, it has to be a continuous way. It's not that, okay, this has to be done at a specific time, but let's say every time when you get a new resource is created, this policy has to be there at the top level so that it get applies to all the new resources created and also the existing resource. So it has to be a continuous process rather than saying it's a timeline. Just
coming to the specific point of a frequency. So you need to look, you look into gamification kind of thing. Policy is giving you kind of a health of your environment. The portal will clearly give you the compliance status, the compliance scorecard, play it like that. Today, my compliance status is, let's say, this. Every month, by end of the month, like create a kind of a framework that every month or specific date we'll do a check. Did we score up? Did we go on the same line or did we go down? This basically shows up, are you in a healthy mode? And this has to be like a defined and operated at your level.
Thanks a lot. That's all for me. I think we went through all the questions from the audience as well. The audience, I urge you to give us your feedback, right? We love to hear your feedback and see what we do well, what we can improve, what you would like to see in the next sessions. We listen carefully to every single feedback. And the second topic is, I'm waiting for you on the next round. So next week we'll focus on the performance. Can you extend and achieve 20,000 transactions per second? And the following week, how you can deploy your application across tenants, what it means, how you manage when you have a multi-tenancy scenario. With that, thank you very much for today. Have a great day.
Thank you all.